The Overwatch League 2021 regular season has come to an end, and that can only mean one thing. It's time for the postseason playoffs. Which 8 teams will get to compete for a chance to take it all, and more importantly, which team has what it takes to win it all? Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Elias, and welcome to the Overwatch League weekly recap. Or at least we used to be weekly. Things have been fairly slow going. Long story short, computer issues have put a big halt on this series, and if you want to know more, go look at the Week 11 video, which I've linked in the description, for more details. I haven't given up on this series, and we'll still be looking at each of the weeks that we missed, so the Summer Showdown and the Countdown Cup, and seeing how my preseason predictions measured up. I'm nearly done with the Week 12 video, that is the second week of the Summer Showdown, so that should be up soon. But today we have much more pressing matters, as the postseason is upon us. Like today, when this video is going up, the plans for the final tournament are going on, and the first games are already completed while I'm recording this. So we should probably be talking about that. It should be noted, though, that from here on out in the postseason, all of the predictions are done now and before the games are played, of course, apart from who I thought would win the league, because I did make that prediction in the preseason, but I'll also be talking about who I think will win now that the regular season is done. But all the tournament matches will be predicted between now and when they happen. Oh, and before I forget, there is no spoiler warning for this video, as this is going to be mostly predictions. There is a little bit of a spoiler warning, I guess, if you've not been paying attention to the league at all and don't know the overall standings, because that is kind of important to the postseason, and I guess technically is a spoiler. And we will be talking about some of the more recent games in terms of like the scores and who won, but there will be no like specific match spoilers with us going into great details of any of the matches. So with that out of the way, let's talk about how the offseason works. First of all, the entire offseason is played without a hero pool. That is to say that every hero is available. Now, all season, the league has been split into an East and a West division, with 8 teams in the East and 12 teams in the West. The playoffs will be a double elimination tournament featuring 8 of those teams, 3 from the East and 5 from the West. For the teams in the East, 2 of those teams have already been locked into the final bracket by having the most league points in the East Division, league points being a combination of the number of wins plus the bonus points for being top 3 in the monthly tournaments. So as we stand, both the Shanghai Dragons and the Chengdu Hunters qualify for the playoffs directly. Next, the teams in 3rd, 4th, and 5th in the standings will compete for the final spot in the East in a single elimination play-in tournament happening tonight, actually, which leaves us with the Seoul Dynasty, Philadelphia Fusion, and Hangzhou Spark competing for that last spot, and unfortunately means that the New York Excelsior, Guangzhou Charge, and the Los Angeles Valiant are eliminated from the playoffs. Got it? Good, because the West is a little bit more complicated. Honestly, the West is pretty much the same sort of deal, but with more teams. Currently, 3 of those teams in the West Division have already locked into the playoffs, those teams being the Dallas Fuel, Los Angeles Gladiators, and the Atlanta Reign. The next 6 teams in the rankings, that is 4th through 9th, will compete in a single elimination play-in tournament for the final 2 spots in the playoffs. The teams that still have a chance are the San Francisco Shock, Houston Outlaws, Washington Justice, Toronto Defiant, Paris Eternal, and the Boston Uprising. And that leaves the Florida Mayhem, London Spitfire, and Vancouver Titans out of the playoffs completely. Now, before we get to the predictions, let's talk about how the plans work and why predicting them is going to be complicated. Well, in the West at least. So, based on the end of the season rankings, each of the teams in both divisions get a seeding. In the East, number 4 seed Philly Fusion will play number 5 seed Hangzhou Spark, and the winner of that match plays the number 3 seed Seoul Dynasty for the East's playoff spot. Nice and easy, pretty straightforward. But in the West, the higher seed gets to pick their opponent. Now, for the first round of the play-ins, that's already been done. The number 6 seed Washington Justice got to pick their opponent, and they chose not the lowest seed, but the number 8 seed Paris Eternal, leaving the number 7 seed the Toronto Defiant to take on the number 9 seed the Boston Uprising. And since the number 4 seed San Francisco Shock gets to pick their opponent of the winners of those 2 matches, leaving the number 5 seed Houston Outlaws with the remaining team to get the final 2 spots in the playoffs. You can probably see how it's hard enough to predict a winner of a match, but to predict who the Shock will want to play against is pretty much impossible, as there could be strategy or rivalries or 100 different reasons to pick one team over another that I can't do it. The final playoff tournament will also start like that, as the top 4 teams will pick their first opponents Well, okay, the top 3 teams will get to pick, so Shanghai, Chengdu, and Dallas, and the 4th-seeded team, the Gladiators, will get to the leftovers. But we'll worry about that when things are a little bit closer. And with that out of the way, let's get on to predictions. Starting in the East, the Philly Fusion will be going up against the Hangzhou Spark. Now, these 2 teams have recently played in the Countdown Cup, and Philly did not have too much trouble against the Spark. And honestly, even with no hero pool, I still think that Philly is the favorite to win, as the Spark have not looked great lately, and Philadelphia has looked a lot better than they had earlier in the season, so I'm giving the first match to the Fusion 3-1. Moving on against the Seoul Dynasty, these 2 teams, so Philly and Seoul, have also played during the Countdown Cup. First in a close 5-map game going to the Dynasty, and then in a 3-1 victory to Seoul in the knockouts for the Countdown Cup tourney. And I think in this case, we'll probably get a close game. I could honestly see it going either way, but I think that the Seoul Dynasty are going to be able to clutch out a win against the Fusion for the final East playoff spot, and they will win 3-2. So with those predictions, I want to briefly give pretty much like an odds for the 3 teams making it to the playoffs. Assuming I am completely off the deep end and everything I just said is wrong, I kind of want to just speak generally. And this is much more important for the West, but I'll say this for the East just for completionist sake. I think that the Spark have no chance of making it to the playoffs. I think that they are pretty much out already. And I'd say that Seoul is the better choice and more likely to make it, but that the Fusion could sneak in. So in other words, Fusion have a chance, Spark do not, and I think Seoul is more likely going to be the winner for that last East Division spot. This will make more sense once we get to the West, but I just wanted to include this for the East just for completionist sake. And for the West, the first round will be a little bit easier to predict than the second set of matches, and I'll be honest, they've already happened by the time I've gotten to record this. So I know already if I am right or wrong, but I did write this, most of the script last night, so there's that. There's no future knowledge in this prediction. First up, we have the Paris Eternal going up against the Washington Justice. Both of these teams have not looked great in the last few weeks, and I am favoring the Eternal just a little bit more, as Washington have looked awful, whereas Paris have just looked a little bit weaker. During the Countdown Cup, every match that the Justice took part in was a 3-0, and the Justice only won one of those, while Paris went 2-2 and made both games they lost look close. For this first match, I'm predicting Paris to win 3-1. On the other side, we have the Boston Uprising going up against the Toronto Defiant. This time, only one of those teams have been struggling as of late, and that's the Boston Uprising, losing both of their games in their last week of the Countdown Cup. Not the last week of the Countdown Cup, but like their last week of games. And they lost both to Vancouver Titans in a 3-0, I might add, and to a struggling Florida Mayhem. Whereas the Toronto Defiant have looked good, only losing to the Shock during the Countdown Cup. So the Defiant are my pick, defeating Boston 3-0. Now, moving on to the tricky part. First, we have to assume that I'm right on my first predictions. Then we have to read the minds of the Shock, and, well, that seems like a bad idea. So based on the Countdown Cup, if I were the Shock, I would pick the Toronto Defiant over the Paris Eternal as my opponent, as the Shock beat the Defiant just a couple of weeks ago. And if they do, I expect the game to go pretty much similarly, with the Shock defeating the Defiant 3-1. Which would leave the Houston Outlaws to go up against the Eternal, and that match could go either way. Paris is a highly underrated team with really good players like Khan on support and Onigod on DPS, so it's more of a question if the DPS duo of Happy and Dante for the Outlaws could get a good game going to overcome the Eternal. I think that it's likely that the Outlaws would win that game, but it'd be close 3-2. On the other hand, if Shock picked the Eternal for their match, I think it'd still be close, potentially even closer than a Houston-Paris game, but I think the Shock would win 3-2. And that leaves Houston to play the Defiant. And again, I don't think that the Defiant would be able to really put up too much of a effort against the Outlaws. And I predict that that would be a Houston win 3-1. So either way, I personally think the favorites to win those final 2 spots would be the San Francisco Shock and the Houston Outlaws. And that's my prediction. But like with the East, let's talk a little bit more generally. I think that Boston is out. 0 chance of getting into the playoffs. I don't think it's likely that Boston will win both of their games and make it. There's been good signs, signs of good things, especially from Punk on the off tank, and Mungbong on support. But there's not been enough of a carry from those two players, and the rest of the team would really need to step up, and that probably isn't even enough. I think that the team with the slimmest chance of making it to the playoffs is the Toronto Defiant. I think Toronto has a reasonably easy game against Boston, but I don't think they stand a chance against either the Shock or the Outlaws, even with their fantastic DPS, especially Aspire. But I think that the weakness of the Toronto support line is a big deal, as even though the Defiant supports are good and just fine, they need to be great to stand a chance against some of these better teams. I see the Washington Justice as having a slightly better chance to get in, but recent performances have been horribly underwhelming for this team. There is a lot of talent here, it just hasn't seemed to gel right. I could see the Justice at one point beating both the Shock and the Outlaws, but right now I don't think they'll even beat the Eternal. The Eternal, on the other hand, could go all the way. I actually think Paris has a better chance against the Shock than the Outlaws, but I'd be more worried about going up against the Shock as they have a lot more to lose than the Outlaws. And Shock are a clutch team, and that's a scary combination. The Outlaws, on the other hand, have been knocking on the door to the monthly tournaments all season, either barely not making it to the knockouts or getting knocked out by the Dallas Fuel. And I think it's just up to them if they want to make it into the playoffs. It's going to be really on how the Outlaws play for themselves versus who they're playing. They're a really good team. They just need a good day, and they'll make it in, which is the advantage both the Shock and the Outlaws have, only having to play one match. So to put all that simply, I think the final two spots are a fight between three teams, the Paris Eternal, San Francisco Shock, and Houston Outlaws, with a very slight chance of the Washington Justice putting themselves into the race, and a slightly smaller chance of the Toronto Defiant doing the same. Sorry, Boston fans, but I don't think this is your year. And that three-team race is pretty much going to come down to who has the better day, and if the Shock don't pick the Eternal. And with that, let's talk very briefly about the playoffs tournament. Now, I don't want to get into the match predictions yet, as we'll do that in another video once the opening matches have been decided and we know who is playing who. But what I do want to do is talk about two things. Who I thought in the preseason would win it all and be the top team, and who I currently think has the best chance of being the champion. So in the preseason, I didn't really plan for the playoffs, but what I did do was write up a final ranking of all 20 teams based on who I thought would be the best, using a combination of my predicted records and combining the East and West divisions in a way that, I think this side is better than this, and this team would beat this team type of thing. It's kind of a lot of eye test and kind of really baseless predictions. So it's not quite the same, but it's close enough that we're going to go with it. My top team in the preseason, the one who would have essentially won it all, was the Shanghai Dragons. And they certainly haven't disappointed. But what about my prediction for the 2021 champion now that the regular season is done? Well, I'm going to give a single answer, and then I'm going to give a kind of cheat and say my favorites to win, as in multiple. First, the bold prediction of a single team that's going to win it all. And this is a brave statement, but I think the LA Gladiators are going to take the championship. And so now let's cheat and talk a little bit more generally. First of all, I don't think any of the teams in the plans are going to be able to take it all. So that leaves 5 teams: the Shanghai Dragons, Chengdu Hunters, LA Gladiators, Atlanta Reign, and Dallas Fuel. Narrowing that down, unfortunately for Atlanta, due to the circumstances of traveling and the fact that Pelican, who has been an absolute star for the Reign this season, cannot travel due to his recent surgery, as in collapsed lung surgery that he then played a match a few days later. It's unlikely that we'll see Pelican play. And the substitute that the Atlanta Reign have is Edison. And while Edison is great, Pelican has a lot more flexibility at the DPS role than Edison, and I think that's enough to stop Atlanta from grasping the championship. Competition is really high at the top this year, and it's really great, and things happen that there's not much you can do about. Pelican did play in the Countdown Cup with 200 ping, but I don't know if he'll play in the playoffs, and there's just too many questions for me to consider Atlanta for the finals. I also don't think Chengdu will have enough to win in the finals either. Chengdu look really good in the Countdown Cup, and they are a very scary team, but they've been really inconsistent in the past, and I think that's going to be their downfall. Chengdu has looked fantastic lately, especially with Leave on the DPS, but when the pressure is on, I don't think that the Hunters will be able to finish, which leaves Dallas, Shanghai, and of course LA. if Dallas can return to their strength after a bad loss that kept them out of the Countdown Cup and be a little bit more consistent, I think they have a chance. But here comes another bold prediction. I think the finals are going to be between the Gladiators and the Shanghai Dragons. Shanghai is too clutch of a team, and again, if Shanghai can kind of come back from a couple of bad losses during the Countdown Cup qualifiers, I think this is a team to be reckoned with. This is going to be some great Overwatch, and the playoffs are shaping up to be some of the closest matches ever. I am so excited. But I'm going to continue working on the recaps for the Summer Showdown as well as the Countdown Cup, getting those out as soon as I can. But I also have a couple of videos planned for this off season. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching. A bit of a different video this time, but predictions are fun, so it's all good. With that, I will see you all in the next video. Bye!